Rowan Delaney was sitting on her gray couch in her Seattle apartment, lazily scrolling through her phone after a long workday, when she noticed a new audio message she hadn't expected. It was from her sister, Tessa. Rowan frowned, puzzled. They rarely sent each other voice messages. That wasn't how they usually communicated. She assumed it would be something casual, a funny story from Tessa's day at Breyer and Holt Consulting, or maybe a quick rant about traffic or deadlines. But the moment she tapped play and heard her sister's voice, her breath caught. The tone was icy, deliberate, and nothing like the sister she knew. Tessa wasn't talking about work or friends. She was talking about Rowan, and every word that followed pierced deeper than Rowan thought possible. Tessa's voice carried accusation and venom. She called Rowan selfish, ungrateful, and impossible to deal with. Each sentence twisted like a knife. She accused Rowan of ruining her life, of always getting in the way, of making everything harder for everyone around her. It was hard to believe the words were meant for her at all. They didn't sound like Tessa. They sounded rehearsed, cruel, almost strategic. Rowan froze, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the rest of the message. Her fingers trembled as she replayed the recording, hoping she'd misheard, that it wasn't real. But the words were the same, cutting through her like glass. For a moment, she felt the air leave her chest. Tessa had always been her closest friend, her confidant, her safe space since childhood, the person she trusted with everything. But now, that trust shattered in seconds. The sister she had defended in every argument, supported through heartbreaks, and protected from judgment, was the same sister tearing her apart with cold precision. Rowan's mind flashed through memories, sacrifices she'd made quietly, moments she'd taken the blame just to keep peace, the endless times she'd chosen to understand rather than fight. But in this single recording, all of that love and effort felt erased, rewritten into bitterness. She sat there motionless, her phone still glowing in her palm as tears welled in her eyes. Confusion swirled with disbelief. How long had Tessa felt this way? Had she been smiling in her face while harboring resentment beneath it all? The thought made her feel dizzy. The apartment felt smaller, the air heavier. She didn't call back. She didn't text. She couldn't. The betrayal felt too raw to confront. She knew if she reacted now, it would come out as anger, words she couldn't take back. She needed to breathe, to think, to make sense of the storm that had just hit her without warning. Leaning back on the couch, she pressed her phone against her chest as if it were fragile glass. Everything between them had changed in an instant. The trust she once thought unshakable now felt like something brittle, ready to crumble under the smallest pressure. Rowan knew she couldn't pretend everything was fine. Not after this. She couldn't smile or talk to Tessa like nothing had happened. For the first time, she felt a kind of loneliness she hadn't known before, the kind that comes from realizing someone you love deeply has turned into a stranger. So she decided to sit with it, to let the ache and confusion settle instead of rushing toward confrontation. She would gather her strength first. She owed herself that much. That night, as she leaned her head back and stared at the ceiling, memories flooded in, childhood sleepovers, whispered secrets, and the promises they'd once made as girls. Rowan and Tessa had been inseparable, partners in every mischief and dream. They used to build pillow forts in their backyard, share snacks late into the night, and promise to never let anything come between them. Rowan remembered how they had laughed through tough times, how Tessa once helped her through their father Arthur's layoff, keeping everyone's spirits up even when she was scared herself. When Rowan had been bullied in middle school, Tessa was there, fierce and protective. Their bond had always seemed unbreakable, a refuge from the chaos of the world. But as Rowan lay there replaying it all, she began to see the cracks she had long refused to notice.
There had always been little things, tiny shifts in tone, subtle glances that hinted at something deeper beneath Tessa's affection. Tessa had a way of turning small competitions into quiet battles. When Rowan achieved something, an award, a compliment at work, a promotion, Tessa's congratulations always came with a faint edge, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sometimes she'd make a joke that stung, masking envy beneath humor. Rowan used to brush it off, telling herself that sisters teased each other like that. But now, in the light of what she heard, every memory felt tainted, every laugh suddenly suspicious. She remembered arguments from the past, petty disagreements that somehow always ended with Rowan apologizing, even when she hadn't done anything wrong. Tessa had a gift for twisting words, planting doubts so subtly that Rowan would start questioning her own judgment. It was manipulation so delicate, it almost looked like love. Rowan remembered defending Tessa countless times, to friends who said she was controlling, to family who quietly hinted that she could be selfish. Rowan had always believed love could smooth over tension, that loyalty meant defending your sister even when others didn't understand her. But now those memories burned with a bitter truth.
It wasn't that the good moments hadn't been real. They had, but hidden underneath was something darker, a pattern. Tessa's quiet need to be one step ahead, her ability to make Rowan feel smaller without ever saying it outright. The more Rowan thought about it, the clearer the picture became. The manipulation hadn't started with the audio message. It had been there for years, disguised as jokes, disguised as care. Small moments, like Tessa's suggesting who Rowan should date, or advising her on career moves that never seemed to benefit her, now stood out as parts of a larger design. It wasn't obvious back then, just small seeds of control, planted carefully, unnoticed until now. And now, in the silence of her apartment, Rowan could finally see the shape of it all. The realization hit with both sadness and clarity. The laughter, the childhood memories, the shared tears, they were genuine. But so were the undercurrents of jealousy, subtle manipulation, and quiet rivalry that had always shadowed their closeness. Rowan felt her chest tighten with a mix of grief and revelation. She had loved her sister deeply, trusted her completely, but perhaps that love had blinded her to the truth. That closeness had always been on Tessa's terms. Now, with that audio message playing over and over in her mind, Rowan understood something painful but necessary. The bond she thought was unbreakable had always been fragile, layered with affection, but also with control. The betrayal didn't just hurt because it was cruel. It hurt because it revealed what had always been hiding beneath their connection. She sat on the edge of her bed, the phone still in her hand, and pressed play again. This time she listened differently. She caught every detail, every inflection. The message wasn't just a burst of anger, it was planned. Rowan's stomach twisted as she listened to Tessa's voice talking about her new position at Breyer and Holt Consulting and laughing about how she could make Rowan look bad in front of her boss. They were mentions of spreading small lies to mutual friends, little stories that would make Rowan seem unreliable or self-centered. The sound of Tessa's laughter, soft, deliberate, cruel, made her hands shake. She had always known her sister could be competitive, but hearing her plan actual sabotage was different. It wasn't rivalry anymore. It was betrayal, calculated and cold. When Tessa mentioned Grant, her husband, Rowan's chest grew tighter. The way she spoke made it sound as if he didn't care or even notice what she was doing, as if he'd go along with anything she said. Rowan had always liked Grant. He was kind, even-tempered, and had a warmth that balanced Tessa's sharpness. The idea that he might unknowingly enable her just because of blind loyalty made Rowan feel trapped. She wiped her eyes, feeling the ache settle deeper. The betrayal was heavy, but beneath the heartbreak, something else was beginning to stir. Resolve.
She realized she couldn't depend on anyone else to protect her. If Tessa wanted to destroy her reputation, Rowan had to be smart, careful, and strategic. This was no longer about emotion. It was about survival. For the first time since hearing that recording, Rowan felt something close to control return to her chest. She didn't need to confront Tessa immediately. Instead, she could quietly plan, protect her work, her image, her peace. She thought of the long hours she'd poured into her job, the relationships she'd built, the credibility she'd earned through hard work. No voice message, no manipulation was going to take that away from her. Rowan placed her phone on the nightstand, took a deep breath, and wiped her tears. The sting of betrayal was still sharp, but beneath it, a new fire was forming, a determination she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't powerless. Not anymore. Rowan promised herself that night that she would not let anyone, family or not, destroy her sense of worth. If Tessa wanted a quiet war, she would find her stronger, wiser, and far more resilient. Rowan watched Tessa from across the room at their family gathering a few weeks later, her stomach tightening as if every laugh in the room pressed harder against her ribs. The house was filled with chatter, the scent of roasted turkey, and the warmth of conversation. Tessa stood near the kitchen island, her platinum blonde hair styled in a neat bob, her silk blouse tucked sharply into a pencil skirt as she poured drinks and laughed like nothing had happened. Rowan's eyes followed her every move. The sound of her laughter, once comforting, now felt staged, a performance for the family who still believed she was flawless. It was hard for Rowan to reconcile this smiling, easygoing version of her sister with the cold, manipulative voice from that audio message. Every joke Tessa made, every compliment she gave to relatives, felt like an act. Rowan's chest tightened with a mix of anger and sadness. She was the only one in the room who knew the truth, the only one who'd heard the venom that her sister carried behind her perfect image.
Everyone else still adored Tessa. Her uncles joked with her, her cousins praised her recent work promotion, and even their father Arthur chuckled as she told a story about her office life. Rowan sat silently in the corner, her smile polite but distant. She felt like an outsider in her own family, watching everyone laugh with someone she no longer recognized. For a fleeting moment, Rowan imagined standing up, confronting Tessa in front of everyone, demanding answers and truth. She pictured the silence that would follow, the shocked faces, the tears, and the chaos. But she knew it wouldn't fix anything. The truth would only turn into another stage for Tessa to twist the narrative, crying, denying, pretending to be the victim. So Rowan chose silence, not as weakness, but as strategy. She decided that instead of an emotional explosion, she would gather what she needed: proof, patterns, and clarity. She would learn Tessa's moves before making her own. If Tessa was going to play this like a game of manipulation, Rowan would learn to play too, but with truth on her side. As the evening went on, Rowan began observing closely. Each word, each glance, each inconsistency. She noticed how Tessa would subtly redirect conversations about work, ensuring that no one compared their successes. She saw how Tessa smiled too wide when relatives praised Rowan's achievements, as if suppressing irritation behind charm. The realization was both painful and empowering. Rowan began to understand how deep Tessa's control ran, how effortlessly she shaped people's perceptions. But now, Rowan wasn't blind to it anymore. From that moment, she made a quiet decision. She would not react impulsively. She would act deliberately. The next day, she began planning. Rowan started taking mental notes of things Tessa said to relatives, subtle contradictions she could verify later. She saved messages, emails, and small exchanges, anything that revealed Tessa's manipulations. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. The more she planned, the steadier she felt. Each day, the shock and pain began to transform into clarity. She started sleeping again, lightly, but without the heaviness of confusion. A few weeks later, at another family brunch, She caught Tessa in a small lie. It was about something simple, how a project at her firm had supposedly failed because of poor communication from Rowan's side. But Rowan knew that wasn't true. She had proof of her part being handled flawlessly. The lie was small, yet it was enough to confirm what she had suspected all along. Tessa wasn't content with personal resentment. She wanted to undermine her professionally, to shape how others viewed her. That small moment changed everything. Rowan realized she couldn't sit idle anymore. She had to defend her name, not through confrontation, but with quiet, consistent truth. At Breyer and Holt Consulting, she poured herself into her work. Every report, every presentation, every project was executed with meticulous care. Her dedication didn't go unnoticed. Her supervisor, Marlene Crawford, even mentioned her in a team meeting for her outstanding work ethic. Rowan smiled faintly that day, not because of the praise itself, but because it symbolized something larger. Tessa's narrative was beginning to lose ground. Whenever Tessa's name came up in conversation, through family, friends, or even mutual acquaintances, Rowan responded with calm professionalism. If someone repeated one of Tessa's subtle digs, Rowan clarified the truth gently, never defensive, just firm and factual. Her restraint became her armor. Little by little, she was reclaiming her place, rebuilding the truth around her life. And Tessa noticed. Rowan saw it in the way her sister's expressions began to shift. The laughter was more forced now. Her tone carried a brittle edge whenever Rowan's name came up. At family events, she'd glance at Rowan a little too often, gauging her reactions, unsure whether she still held the upper hand. Rowan didn't need to fight loudly. Her quiet victories were enough. She was changing. The same woman who once sat paralyzed by betrayal was now moving through each day with confidence, stronger, sharper, and more composed. Every time she calmly corrected a false claim, every time she received recognition at work, she felt herself healing. The betrayal had become her teacher. The pain had become her fuel. By the end of that month, Rowan realized something she hadn't before. Strength didn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stood tall, steady, and unshaken. Rowan's sadness, the heaviness that had gripped her after hearing the audio, began to lift little by little. Every small win, every nod of approval from her supervisor, every successful project, every subtle correction of Tessa's lies became a quiet form of healing. She was no longer drowning in hurt. She was building herself again, piece by piece. Each day brought a little more confidence, a little more peace. Her colleagues at Breyer and Holt noticed the difference. Rowan, who had once been soft-spoken and overly accommodating, now carried herself with an unmistakable, calm authority. She didn't seek validation anymore. Her work spoke for her. Whenever someone mentioned her name in meetings, it was followed by respect. That, more than anything, was her victory. Tessa's efforts to undermine her began to fall apart slowly, though Rowan never spoke about it directly. She didn't need to. Instead, she let her consistency and integrity become her defense. Whenever she heard a rumor, some faint echo of Tessa's manipulation, Rowan addressed it quietly, armed with facts and evidence. She didn't need to argue or justify herself loudly. A calm truth, spoken once, was stronger than any of Tessa's twisted stories. It didn't take long for Tessa to sense that something had changed. Her control was slipping, and it unsettled her. When they saw each other at family dinners, Rowan noticed the shift in Tessa's body language. Her laughter sounded strained, her voice occasionally cracked when Rowan's name came up. She tried to act composed, but the ease she once had around Rowan was gone. Rowan, on the other hand, stayed calm, measured, polite, and unreadable. She had learned that power often lay in restraint. She didn't have to retaliate or prove anything anymore. Her peace was its own quiet statement. Tessa, however, couldn't hide her growing discomfort. Every time they crossed paths, she tried to start small conversations, fishing for signs that Rowan still cared or still hurt. But Rowan's responses were warm, polite, and distant, unchangeable. That was when Tessa began to panic quietly. Rowan's calmness unsettled her far more than confrontation ever could. She wasn't angry anymore. She was steady, and that made her unpredictable. The old patterns had broken. Tessa could no longer manipulate, guilt-trip, or twist her way into control. Rowan had learned how to see through her, and that changed everything. It wasn't about revenge. It was about liberation. The betrayal had stopped defining her. It had instead refined her. By the time autumn rolled around, Rowan realized she wasn't the same woman who had once sat on her couch paralyzed by heartbreak. She had become someone new, wiser, more aware, and quietly strong. Her subtle victories, those small, dignified moments when she handled manipulation with grace, gave her hope. The storm Tessa meant to destroy her instead strengthened her. Rowan knew that the road ahead would still have challenges. There would still be family events, shared gatherings, and moments where the air between them would feel tense. But she also knew something that made all the difference. She was ready for all of it. She no longer feared confrontation because she had nothing to hide. The truth, her truth, was enough. This was the start of her quiet reclamation, a season where she would rebuild everything Tessa tried to break. Not loudly, not bitterly, but with a calm, unshakable grace that no manipulation could touch. Rowan watched quietly as Tessa moved around their parents' house one Friday evening, hosting a small family dinner that was meant to be casual and cheerful. Tessa was in her element, organizing, directing, laughing as she arranged dishes on the long oak table. Her platinum bob caught the golden kitchen light as she gestured animatedly, her voice bright and commanding. Everything looked normal from the outside, but Rowan had learned to see beneath the surface. She noticed the subtle glances, the way Tessa carefully positioned people at the table, how she managed conversations so that attention flowed toward her. As Tessa instructed their cousins on where to sit, she slipped up. It was something small, an inconsistency in a story she had told Rowan a week earlier about a work event. She mentioned a detail that completely contradicted what she had said before. Rowan froze for half a second. The lie was minor, almost unnoticeable to anyone else, but to her, it was confirmation. The deception wasn't limited to her anymore. Tessa's manipulation reached into the entire family, twisting small truths to maintain her spotless image. Rowan didn't react outwardly. She smiled, nodded, helped pass dishes, and said nothing. But inside, she took note. Another piece of the puzzle. This slip changed everything. It gave Rowan insight into how far Tessa's control extended and how much more careful she needed to be. Her sister wasn't just manipulating her privately anymore. She was weaving subtle lies into the family's shared narrative. As the evening went on, Rowan's thoughts spiraled. Should she expose Tessa now? Should she call out the lie in front of everyone and watch the illusion collapse? The idea flickered temptingly in her mind, but she dismissed it just as quickly. That kind of confrontation would tear the family apart. She imagined the fallout, their father Arthur's confusion, their mother's heartbreak, the stunned faces around the table. And she could already see Tessa's performance, the tears, the self-defense, the carefully crafted victimhood. No, Rowan thought. It wasn't time. She would act, but not recklessly. As laughter filled the room, Rowan sat quietly, her smile composed, her eyes steady. She knew the truth now, and with that knowledge came power. She decided that she wouldn't expose Tessa blindly. She would gather more evidence, small cracks, subtle contradictions, every detail that showed the real nature behind the charm. She would not move until she was sure. Every lie Tessa told, every inconsistency she revealed,
would become part of Rowan's quiet preparation. Later that night, as they cleared the table, Rowan moved with calm precision. She engaged in small talk, complimented the food, and laughed when needed, but her mind was recording everything, every phrase, every reaction. She wasn't acting out of malice. It was necessity. This wasn't just about protecting herself anymore. It was about protecting the family from being drawn deeper into Tessa's manipulations. As the evening drew to a close, Rowan's conviction deepened. The more she saw, the more she realized how dangerous silence could be. Yet she also understood that rushing could cause more damage than good. This was a moral crossroads. Should she act to protect herself only, or should she take the harder road and protect everyone else too, even if it meant tearing apart the illusion her family lived in? The thought weighed heavily on her.
Tessa still laughed easily across the room, unaware that her control was slipping with every word. Rowan watched her sister, her polished perfection, her bright smile, and felt something shift inside her. The pain was still there, but now it carried clarity. By the time the guests started leaving, Rowan knew what she had to do. She wouldn't confront Tessa in anger or humiliation. She would move strategically, quietly, and truthfully. She was no longer the wounded sister. She was the observer, the planner, the one who finally saw the full picture. That night, as she drove home through the quiet Seattle streets, she felt an odd calm settle over her. The city lights blurred past the windshield, reflecting on her face as she gripped the steering wheel lightly. Tessa's lies had once made her feel powerless. Now they gave her direction. Every falsehood, every manipulation was fuel for her next move. The coming confrontation would be complicated, she knew that, but she was ready to handle it with precision, not emotion. She would wait for the right time, and when that moment came, the truth would be undeniable. Rowan moved carefully in the days that followed, planning each step like a quiet strategist. She knew that one wrong move could turn everything against her. So instead of reacting impulsively, she acted deliberately, measured, composed, and calm. Whenever Tessa told small lies in family conversations, Rowan began to subtly correct them, but not in ways that caused open conflict. If Tessa misrepresented a situation or twisted Rowan's words, Rowan would gently clarify with context, her tone light and natural. It wasn't obvious that she was countering her sister, but the truth was being restored one calm correction at a time. It became a quiet art. In one conversation with their Aunt Marlene, Tessa mentioned that Rowan had mishandled a project at Briar and Colt, causing delays. Rowan smiled and replied softly, "Oh, that must have been about the outreach file, right?" Actually, the client confirmed everything was delivered early. Marlene Crawford even commended our timing. She said it kindly, with no trace of defensiveness. The truth slipped through smoothly, impossible to argue with. And for the first time, Rowan saw a flicker of panic cross her face, a tiny break in her composure. That reaction alone told Rowan she was on the right path. She began to extend her subtle strategy further, even around Grant, Tessa's husband. When Tessa tried to twist narratives in casual conversation, Rowan stayed calm and factual. She'd offer clarifications without accusation, using the same gentle tone that disarmed everyone. At first, Grant didn't notice, but over time, he began to catch the contradictions himself. Whenever Tessa's stories didn't quite line up, his eyes would flicker briefly toward Rowan, silently asking questions he didn't voice. Rowan saw it, and it gave her quiet satisfaction, not because she wanted to hurt Tessa, but because the truth was finally beginning to breathe. But even as her quiet victories grew, Rowan couldn't ignore the guilt that occasionally crept in. There were moments when she'd sit alone after dinner, thinking about how far she'd been pushed, to plan, to observe, to maneuver. She had never imagined needing to treat her sister like an opponent on a chessboard. The guilt wasn't because she felt wrong, it was because she mourned what she had lost. Love had turned into caution. Trust had turned into strategy. Yet she reminded herself why she was doing it. This wasn't about revenge. It was about self-respect.
Tessa had crossed a line, trying to destroy her reputation, twist relationships, and make her doubt herself. Rowan couldn't stand by anymore. She had spent too many years protecting her sister's image at the expense of her own peace.
So she let the guilt settle but not stop her. As days passed, the tension between them thickened. Tessa's once effortless charm began to falter. She stumbled over her words sometimes, watching Rowan too closely. Her laugh came out forced. Her confidence was cracking. Rowan saw it in every conversation, the subtle uncertainty that now lived behind her sister's eyes. It wasn't triumph she felt, but affirmation. This was working. Truth was surfacing, naturally, without cruelty. She reminded herself daily that this wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming her dignity, about showing that integrity could outlast deceit. The family began to notice small things too. Nothing dramatic, just subtle shifts. People started asking more questions when Tessa spoke, questions that revealed cracks in her stories. Rowan never fueled it directly, but her presence alone now carried weight. She had become calm, poised, and quietly respected. At work, her composure was admired. At home, her patience was noticed. And within her, a steady kind of strength had replaced the fragile pain she once felt. By the end of that week, Rowan felt something she hadn't in a long time: peace. Her subtle exposure of Tessa's manipulation wasn't loud or cruel, but it was effective. Her quiet truth was winning ground every day. Even the guilt that had once haunted her began to fade. She realized she was no longer operating out of hurt, but out of self-respect and self-preservation. Each day, she became more grounded, more sure of who she was. The betrayal had not destroyed her, it had refined her. And as she sat in her apartment one evening, watching the Seattle skyline from her balcony, Rowan smiled faintly. She wasn't the naive sister anymore. She was the strong one, the one who could see through lies, hold her ground, and still walk with grace. The family had gathered again for dinner one crisp Saturday evening, the air thick with conversation and the faint clinking of cutlery against porcelain. It was meant to be a warm, familiar night. Laughter, stories, the smell of roasted chicken and herbs filling the dining room. Yet Rowan could feel something deeper beneath the noise. A quiet electricity, the tension of something waiting to unfold. She sat near the end of the table, her hands resting lightly on her lap, her phone tucked discreetly in her bag beside her. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, but now that it was here, her heartbeat felt heavier, slower. Across from her sat Tessa, glowing in her usual way. Her platinum hair shone under the chandelier's light, and she wore a fitted navy blue dress that matched her carefully painted nails. She laughed easily, talking about her work projects and weekend plans, her tone smooth, effortless, perfect. To everyone else, it looked like just another family dinner. To Rowan, it was the culmination of months of silent planning, quiet endurance, and truth-gathering. When the main course was served, the timing felt right. Rowan waited until the conversations had softened, until the room had quieted just enough to hear the creak of silverware being set down. Then she took a slow breath and spoke. "Before we move on to dessert, there's something we need to talk about." The table fell silent almost immediately. Her father, Arthur, looked up in surprise, and her mother's eyes darted between the two sisters, sensing the shift. Tessa's smile flickered, just a little. "What's wrong?" she asked, trying to sound light. Rowan's gaze stayed on her sister. "You'll understand in a moment." She reached into her bag and unlocked her phone, her movements deliberate. Then she pressed play. The room filled with the unmistakable sound of Tessa's voice. Cold, sharp, calculated. Every word from that audio message, every insult,
Every plan, every deliberate attempt to ruin Rowan spilled into the air for everyone to hear. The sound seemed to stretch time itself.
Tessa's face changed instantly. Shock, confusion, anger, all flickering one after another as the realization hit her. Grant froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Arthur leaned back in disbelief. Rowan didn't speak. She let the truth speak for her. When the audio ended, the silence was suffocating. Tessa opened her mouth, her voice trembling. "That's not what it sounds like. I was just venting. I didn't mean any of it." But the panic in her eyes betrayed her. Grant's face was pale, his expression torn between disbelief and disappointment. He looked at Rowan, then at Tessa, his voice quiet but firm. "Tessa, how long has this been going on?" Tessa stammered, searching for words that wouldn't come. I was just frustrated. You know how sisters argue. It wasn't serious." Arthur's voice was calm, but heavy. Frustration doesn't sound like planning someone's downfall. The room grew colder. Every face around the table told the same story. Shock, betrayal, sadness. Rowan remained composed. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat, didn't add a single accusation. She simply sat there, her expression steady, her silence powerful. The weight of her restraint made everything sharper, undeniable. When Tessa tried again to explain, her voice broke. "You've always made me feel invisible," she whispered, her eyes wet. "I just wanted some space." Rowan looked at her sister quietly, the ache in her chest returning but softer now. "And this was your way of getting it?" she asked gently. Her tone wasn't cruel, just honest, painfully honest. Tessa dropped her gaze. Across the table, Grant looked devastated. Arthur rubbed his temples, trying to piece everything together. Their mother sat in stunned silence, her eyes glistening. Rowan exhaled slowly. She hadn't wanted revenge. She had wanted the truth, out in the open, undeniable. And now, it was. As the evening went on, the atmosphere remained tense. Tessa tried to regain her composure, insisting that everything had been taken out of context. But no one could unhear what they had heard. The recording had stripped away all illusion. For Rowan, the feeling wasn't victory, it was release. Relief that she no longer carried the weight of secrets. Relief that she had faced her sister's betrayal with calm courage. The family would never be the same after that night. Some defended Tessa gently, out of love. Others stood quietly with Rowan. The balance between them had shifted forever. When dinner finally ended, the silence in the house was thick and heavy. Rowan gathered her things slowly, her hands steady. As she stepped outside into the cool Seattle night, she felt something she hadn't in months. Peace. Not the kind that comes from happiness, but from truth. The truth was out. And that was enough. After the confrontation at the family dinner, the aftermath was swift and unavoidable. The fallout rippled through their circle like a quiet storm. No one could pretend nothing had happened. Tessa's voice on that audio had made sure of that. In the days that followed, Tessa tried to patch things together. She called relatives, sent long messages, and told anyone who would listen that it had all been a misunderstanding. But it was too late. The damage was done. The people who had once trusted her unconditionally now looked at her differently. They listened politely when she spoke, but there was hesitation in their eyes. Doubt had replaced admiration. At church gatherings and family meetups, conversations shifted when she entered a room. No one confronted her directly, but the atmosphere had changed. The illusion she had built for years of being the composed, admired sister was cracking in plain sight. Rowan saw it happen quietly, and though part of her heart ached for her sister, another part finally exhaled. It wasn't satisfaction, it was relief. For so long, Tessa had lived behind polished words and subtle manipulation, but now people were starting to see the truth for themselves. Rowan didn't need to say anything more. The truth had done its work. Her relatives began reaching out to her, softly, cautiously. Her Aunt Marlene called one morning to say, "I don't know all the details, but I want you to know we see your strength. You handled yourself with grace." Rowan thanked her gently, her heart heavy but grateful. At Briar and Holt, her days continued as usual, though she felt lighter. Her coworkers noticed her focus and composure, unaware of the personal storm she had just walked through. Her supervisor, Marlene Crawford, invited her to lead a new client project, something she'd been aiming for months. It wasn't just professional growth, it was personal healing in motion. Meanwhile, Tessa's attempts to fix her reputation grew more desperate. She started posting cheerful family photos online, trying to show unity that didn't exist. She told people she and Rowan had worked things out, but most sensed the performance. Then one evening, Tessa showed up at Rowan's apartment unannounced. She stood at the door in a simple gray coat, her makeup smudged, her face pale. Rowan hesitated before opening the door fully. "Can we talk?" Tessa's voice cracked slightly. "Please." Rowan nodded and stepped aside. They sat in silence for a long moment, the hum of the city outside filling the space between them. Then Tessa spoke. "I never meant for things to go that far," she said softly. "I was angry, jealous maybe. I didn't mean to hurt you." Rowan studied her face. The tears in her sister's eyes looked real, but she'd learned to look beyond emotion. She had to. "Tessa, what you did wasn't just a mistake. You planned it. You said things that could have ruined my career. You lied to people we both love." Tessa's lips trembled. I know I messed up. I just didn't think it would blow up like that." Rowan's heart squeezed. She wanted to forgive her, but she also knew that forgiveness didn't erase what was broken. "I'm not angry anymore," Rowan said quietly, "but I can't pretend it didn't happen. Trust doesn't rebuild itself overnight." Tessa nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. She reached out to hold Rowan's hand, but Rowan hesitated, before finally letting her fingers rest lightly in her sister's. The moment was painful and tender all at once. A farewell to the closeness they once had, and an acknowledgement of what would never be the same. When Tessa left that evening, Rowan stood by the door for a long while, staring at the empty hallway. There was sadness, yes, but also closure. The next few weeks brought quiet healing. Family members stopped asking about the drama, and the conversations turned back to normal life. But underneath, everyone knew a line had been drawn, a truth uncovered that could not be forgotten. Rowan focused on rebuilding her peace. She set firm boundaries, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. If Tessa called, she answered kindly, but kept the conversations brief. No more emotional openings. No more giving her power away. It was strange how calm life felt after so much chaos. Her apartment, once filled with restless thoughts and sleepless nights, now carried a stillness she hadn't known in years. One night, as she sat by her window with a cup of tea, watching the lights of downtown Seattle reflect on the water, she realized she was free. Not just from her sister's manipulation, but from her own fear. Tessa still existed in her world, but she no longer controlled it. Rowan had chosen peace over performance, honesty over illusion, and it showed in every part of her life. Her relationships became stronger, grounded in respect and truth. Her confidence, once shaken, had returned in quiet strength. She had lost something precious, yes, But she had gained something deeper. The knowledge that dignity doesn't come from what others think of you. It comes from how you carry yourself when everything around you falls apart. Even though Tessa still tried to repair her image among some of the family, the damage had already taken root. No matter how many times she smiled, apologized, or pretended that everything was fine, something in the way people looked at her had changed forever. At first, a few relatives still gave her the benefit of the doubt, those who couldn't reconcile the polished Tessa they knew with the cold voice they had heard in that recording. But as weeks turned to months, even they began to see it. They noticed her careful wording, her slight exaggerations, the way she avoided accountability in every conversation. The charm that once dazzled everyone no longer worked. Meanwhile, Rowan had no need to defend herself anymore. Her silence had become her statement. Her actions, steady, consistent, and honest, spoke louder than any defense could. She didn't talk about what had happened, didn't bring up the dinner confrontation, didn't correct people's assumptions. She simply lived truthfully, and slowly people began to see who she really was. A woman who had endured betrayal with grace, who refused to be defined by her pain. Tessa, realizing her grasp on perception was slipping, grew desperate. She began attending family gatherings with forced brightness, talking louder than usual, cracking jokes that no one quite laughed at. She over-explained herself, trying to prove that she had changed. But the effort showed. It was clear she was performing. Then, one quiet afternoon, Tessa asked to meet Rowan again. They sat at a coffee shop downtown, sunlight streaming through the window onto the table between them. "I know things will never be the same," Tessa began, her voice subdued. "But I just want us to start over somehow. I hate how everyone looks at me now." Rowan stirred her coffee slowly before replying. "Tessa, this isn't about what everyone thinks. It's about what you did, and how we both move forward from it." She sighed. "You've always been better at moving forward. I'm the one stuck." Rowan looked at her sister quietly. For the first time, she saw genuine remorse, or at least the weight of consequence. But forgiveness, she knew, wasn't about pretending nothing had happened. It was about choosing peace without reopening old wounds. "I don't hate you," Rowan said finally, "but I need distance, for a while at least. I need space to remember who I am without constantly cleaning up your mess." Tessa's eyes filled with tears. "I understand," she whispered. When they stood to leave, Rowan felt a strange stillness, an acceptance that some bonds, even the strongest ones, are not meant to return to what they once were. Over the next few months, Rowan noticed something she hadn't before. People treated her differently, not out of pity, but respect. They saw her strength, her quiet dignity. Friends who had once believed Tessa's subtle narratives about her now came back with softer voices, apologetic tones, and newfound admiration. It wasn't about vindication. It was about truth finally finding its balance. Rowan's life began to rebuild itself naturally. She spent weekends hiking outside the city, joined a local volunteer group, and took up photography again, something she hadn't done since college. The calm of the outdoors helped her heal from the noise of the past year. Her apartment reflected her new peace, too. She replaced old decor, rearranged her space, and filled her walls with photos she had taken herself, sunsets, lakes, and quiet forest paths. Each photo reminded her of the peace she fought to reclaim. She noticed how she smiled more easily now, genuine smiles, not the guarded ones she'd worn during months of pain. She had learned to forgive without forgetting, to love without losing herself. Tessa continued living her life, still married to Grant, still trying to repair her image, but the difference was visible. Grant, once blindly loyal, now saw her more clearly. Their relationship had cooled. At gatherings, he often gravitated toward conversations with Rowan, not out of affection, but out of quiet respect. Rowan never took pleasure in that shift, though. She didn't want Tessa's ruin. She only wanted freedom. And now she had it. Each morning she woke with a clear mind, grateful for peace instead of performance. By spring, it was clear to everyone the balance had changed permanently. The sister who once lived in Tessa's shadow now stood in her own light. Rowan hadn't screamed or fought or begged for anyone's approval. She had simply let the truth breathe, and it had done the work for her. In the end, it wasn't confrontation that freed her. It was her calm, her restraint, and her refusal to be dragged into chaos. And through it all, she discovered something profound. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, unyielding, certain. The kind of strength that stands in a storm and doesn't break. Rowan sat by the window one quiet evening, the last of the sun spilling across her living room walls. The soft orange light washed over the furniture, casting long, calm shadows. She held a cup of chamomile tea in her hands, her mind wandering through everything that had happened in the past months. She thought about the first night, the shock of hearing Tessa's voice, the anger, the heartbreak, the confusion that had almost swallowed her whole. It all felt like a different lifetime now. She had survived it, not by fighting louder, but by standing still and thinking clearly when everything around her demanded chaos. It had been a long, painful journey, but one that reshaped her completely. Rowan had become more cautious, yes, but not fearful. Her new caution came from wisdom, not distrust. She had learned that love and loyalty were not excuses for blindness, and that not everyone deserved full access to her heart. She sipped her tea slowly, listening to the faint hum of the city below. Through the window, she could see the Seattle skyline glowing softly against the darkening sky. The life outside went on as usual. Cars moving, people laughing, lights flickering in nearby apartments. But inside her, something had changed forever. She was no longer the woman who questioned her worth through someone else's approval. The entire ordeal had taught her how to observe without overreacting, to wait before speaking, and to protect her peace as fiercely as she once protected relationships that didn't protect her back. In her reflection on the window glass, she saw someone stronger, someone steadier, a woman who had learned not to crumble at the weight of betrayal, but to bend, breathe, and rise again. And yet, even in her newfound peace, she carried small scars, memories that would never fully fade. The pain of realizing her sister's envy, the loss of a bond that once meant everything, the quiet ache of knowing that trust could never return to what it once was. But she accepted it. Those scars were part of her now, proof that she had endured, that she had learned. Rowan knew she might forgive Tessa someday, maybe when time had softened the sharp edges of memory. But forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. It meant release, and she was already living in that freedom. Life had begun to settle into a rhythm she hadn't known in years. Mornings were peaceful. Work was fulfilling. Her friendships, those real and grounded, were growing deeper. The people around her saw her authenticity, her quiet resilience, and they responded to it. She no longer needed to explain her story to anyone. The truth had already spoken for her. Some nights, she still thought about Tessa, about how things might have been if honesty had existed between them. But those thoughts no longer brought tears or anger. They brought clarity. She realized that not every relationship survives truth, and that's okay. Some endings are necessary to restore peace. As she looked around her apartment, the framed photos of her travels, her small plants by the window, and the flicker of a single candle on the table, Rowan felt something she hadn't in a long time: contentment. Real, quiet, unshakable contentment. The pain had shaped her, but it no longer defined her. She had learned that sometimes deliverance comes disguised as betrayal, that endings, painful as they are, often hold the beginnings of new freedom. Her story wasn't about revenge, it was about rediscovery. She had walked through heartbreak and come out wiser, softer in the right ways, stronger in the ones that mattered most. As the sun disappeared behind the skyline, Rowan whispered softly to herself, "I made it." And she had. She had faced the betrayal that once threatened to break her and turned it into the fire that forged her strength. Outside, the first stars appeared, small but steady, scattered across the dark sky. Rowan leaned back, her heart at peace, her eyes calm. Life would continue, with its turns, surprises, and uncertainties, but she was ready. She knew who she was now. No bitterness, no anger, just quiet assurance. She had faced deception and stood in truth. She had chosen dignity over despair. And though the memory of betrayal would remain, it no longer held power over her. It had become a lesson, a mark of growth, not grief. As the evening settled into night, Rowan smiled faintly, her reflections soft in the glass. The storm had passed, and what remained was strength. Quiet, honest, and her own.